What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Mike and I are super excited to sit down and talk to Dr. Peter Fitschen today. Peter, how you doing today?
Good. Glad I could be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're really excited to have you here today. I know Mike and I are excited to get into the things we're going to talk about in a little bit. But before we get into that, could you provide a little bit of a background about yourself for anyone that's not familiar with you?
Yeah, so I guess, I'll start on the academic side of things. So I have a PhD in nutritional science from the University of Illinois. I also have a bachelor's in biochem. I minored in nutrition, and then I have a master's in biology with the physiology concentration. Both those are from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. So I went to college for 11 and a half years for stuff related to bodybuilding. And then, and then I also, picked up my CSCS along the way. So I have my, training cert and everything too. And then on the competitive or bodybuilding applied side of things, my first show was actually 16 years ago next week. So April 24th of 2004 was my first show. And I started lifting in 2002, competing in 2004. I've dieted to stage lean 6 times now. I think I've done 10, 12 shows, something like that. And I won my pro card in 2012 and did my first season competing as a pro in 2016. And now I'm waiting for some shows in 2020. So, and then aside from that, I co-authored a book with Cliff Wilson on bodybuilding contest prep. I've co-authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications at this point. Many of those are related to lifting, bodybuilding, things like that. I travel for talks and guest lecture college classes and whatnot. So I basically have created a career kind of around bodybuilding, which is pretty cool. I didn't know that was possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that background, Peter. So as everyone has just heard from Peter, extremely experienced guy when it comes to the bodybuilding world, both in education and in terms of practical experience. And that kind of leads us into our first range of topics. And something that hits home for me, I just wrapped up my contest prep, 24 weeks into dieting, had a few shows get canceled, and ultimately I made a decision to transition into the off season. For where I'm at in my career, what I hope to achieve in the future, it made the most sense. And Peter is a coach. He has a lot of clients in a similar situation. He himself is in a similar situation. Like he just said, he's waiting on some 2020 shows. Peter's holding out. He's been in the game for a bit, and that decision makes the most sense for him. So with that being said, Peter, can you outline just some general variables for all the competitors out there who are right now in the middle of their prep, trying to make the decision on whether or not they should pack things in for the season? What are the variables to consider for everyone?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing I told all of my clients when this kind of all started happening is, this isn't something like there's a right or wrong answer to. Like, this isn't something that has ever come up before. None of us have experienced this. And I mean, there is no right or wrong. I mean, you need to kind of evaluate your situation, decide what's best for you. I told all of them, whatever you decide, I'll help you with the next steps, respect your decision, whatever, let's chat. And so, things to consider, I think, there's several things to consider. One is, how far into your prep are you? If you are 3 months into prep and you were, for example, I had a couple of clients where they started prep in January. They were looking at like May, June shows. Things started getting canceled in like March, April. They were only, 3 months into a 6-month cut. In that situation, it's pretty easy just to reverse out of that. Maybe even just hold that weight until you get closer to fall or, next year, whatever, you know what I mean? Or just transition to full off season. In that situation, yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Other people in that situation have just, decided, hey, I'm going to keep pushing for summer shows and keep going. On the other hand, if you're someone like me, I started prep last May. And my first show got canceled in March at 6 weeks out. And don't get me wrong, that's 10 months, but that's not linear. There were diet breaks along the way. I took, as long as a 6-week diet break at about the midpoint. So it wasn't a linear cut, but it's been like 10, it was 10 months by that point. So it's been about 11 now. So for me, I was much further in. And so I know, for me to get where I want to be stage lean, that would be the process required again from the off season. So that would be losing almost another year. So if I have to wait a few more months, that's less in the long term than having to spend a whole nother year, getting back to this point. I think those are all things to consider. So that, that's one, variable. I think other variables to consider too is how long has it been since your last prep, your last show, last time you were stage lean, and how long is it going to be till you are again? If you're one of these people who likes to compete every year, every couple of years, might make the most sense to, and you've just competed a year or two ago, might make the most sense to reverse out. If you're someone who, like myself, 2016 was the last time I was this lean. I was 20 plus pounds over stage lean the entire time, basically till I started diet, got into my prep again. I only did a couple of short mini cuts in 4 years. Like I spent most of my time out of a deficit. I haven't been this lean. I have no intention of being this lean again for another 4 to 6 years. So 6 years, it'd be 6 years until I turn 40. And so, I was kind of contemplating that before this all happened. If this drags out till fall or whatever, that's probably what's going to happen. It'll be 2026 when I'm 40. And so, okay, this is the only time in 8 to 10 years I'm going to be here. I can drag it out a few months. But if you're someone who wants to be competing more frequently than that, probably, then, maybe this isn't the greatest idea. Because at the end of the day, you still want more time out of a deficit than in one. I think it's also important to look at how far into your training career you are. If you are a beginner, you're young, are you losing out on time? You could be growing early in your career when you can make more progress. I've been lifting weights for 18 years now consistently, and I'm natural and I am in my mid 30s. Rate of gain for me is not fast. I did make visual progress in the last 4 years. I've posted a picture on social media. Clearly I've gotten better in the last 4 years, spending that time out of a deficit. But I'm not losing my newbie gains. I'm not losing those early years. Those are long gone. We're 18 years in here. And like I said, I have no intention after I'm done competing to be here for another 4 to 6 years. I think there's also, other factors, related to like the pandemic, what kind of added stress do you have in your life? Are you someone who's unemployed during this time? Financially, your kids are out of school, are there these added stressors on you, and even training? Do you have somewhere, you can absolutely train with light weights and maintain. I have some clients dieting for shows who look awesome, holding muscle well with at-home mainly bands and whatnot. But those are things to consider. In my situation, my wife works in healthcare. She's got a job. I coach. I think everyone's coaching business takes some hit during this, but I'm okay. We don't have kids. We don't have, like there isn't a lot of financial stress. We have a decent home gym. I'm fortunate. I have a barbell. I have heavy weights. I have heavy dumbbells. I have a cable machine. I have, a squat rack, adjustable bench, a few other pieces of equipment. And I can train, pretty similar to how I normally would. And so those are all things to consider also. And then, one other factor I would look at too is how easy is it for you to maintain where you're at? And so, and how much weight would you have to gain, or how much food would you have to add to actually feel okay? Some people, they are just really grinding, and it's really hard for them to stay super lean. And, they and just mentally, also the mental as well as physical, they're really grinding mentally. It's hard. I think a lot of times for newer competitors, it can be a lot more difficult, compared to someone who's been around forever. Clients who, someone who's competed a while, I think it could be a lot easier to hold some of these leaner body fats because you kind of know what it feels like. You've done it before. Like this isn't a surprise. But how easy is it for you to hold? So, different people can hold weights easier, more difficult than others. And so, if you're someone, myself, and people are going to hate me for saying this, but I have a really adaptive metabolism that comes with, there is good and bad to that, right? So I am very good at defending against body weight gain or loss. And so my off season is like 4,200 calories a day at the peak. Even in my mid 30s now, when I was in my early 20s, late teens, it was like 5,400. So it's slowed, metabolic rate slowed some, but I still eat 4,200 a day in the off season. And worst of prep's like 2,200. So that's 2,000 calories a day less. And I'm not losing fast there. That's like deep in prep, losing a pound a week at most. And I'm eating 2,000 calories a day less. But that also works to my advantage during this time. I'm back up to like 3,100 calories a day, and I'm holding like 4 pounds over stage weight. And a lot of that is probably water and glycogen because it came pretty quick. But we've been able to work my food up to, I'm eating like 900 calories a day more than the worst of my prep, holding 4 pounds over stage weight. I actually feel good. Like, I have good energy. I don't drag during the day. I sleep like a rock again. Like, I don't sleep when I'm lean. Man, I sleep like a rock. I far more regular, like hunger isn't an issue. I am actually surprised myself how like this still wouldn't be long-term sustainable, but like, if I got to hold this for a couple months, like this is totally doable. This isn't, I don't have all the late prep feels. Now, not everybody can do that, so we're using the fact my metabolism is so adaptive to my advantage here. Not everybody's in that situation. And so I think those are all variables to consider, and again, there's not a right or a wrong, and so some of my clients have decided, hey, I'm not going to compete at all this year. I'll shoot for next year, a couple of years down the road. Some have decided, hey, I want to like just hang, I'm part of the way to stage lean. Can we just diet break here, kind of ride this out, see what happens by summer, fall? And some are, still shooting for summer or fall, or especially fall. But I mean, some are still shooting for summer shows, and they still need to get leaner to be ready. So they have to keep dieting, and obviously if shows were to be changed, we would, adjust their plan. And so I know there's a really, really, really long answer, but there are a lot of things I think that are important to consider, and my situation might not be the same as someone else's, or my client, a client of mine, and that's fine. I think as a coach, you need to be able to relate to people, and as long as they're doing something that's reasonable, support them in their decisions.
Yeah, that was fantastic. There's definitely a lot to consider. And, like you mentioned, ultimately this needs to be treated on a case-by-case basis. But I think you provided a lot of great examples for people who might be sitting on the fence right now and not sure about what to do, where there were a lot of potential takeaways where they might listen to this and be like, well, I think that scenario kind of describes myself, and that helps me make my decision. So thank you for that, Peter. And I think we can roll into the next portion of this.
And you kind of mentioned the psychological and mental aspect of this for your competitors, for everyone you're coaching. And Mike and I were kind of having a similar conversation about it in his prep, because Mike made a decision to kind of remove himself going forward and kind of backing out of his diet. Mm-hmm. So as far as your clients go, how have they coped with this whole process psychologically? And can you kind of explain your role as a coach in that?
Yeah. So this is, I'm someone I've always been big on like, hey, you probably should have competed a few times yourself and gotten really lean to be able to coach clients, because you can read about what it takes to get stage lean and what it feels like to get stage lean when you're grinding those last few pounds off. But until you've done it, you can't relate, right? It just, there are things that you just don't know until you felt it, like it, to really be able to empathize with clients. And this is a situation where like, it was a blessing in disguise that my show got canceled at 6 days out, because I was closer to a show than any of my clients. Like I had clients kept shows canceled a couple weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks out, but not during peak week. And so like, I was in a worse spot than them. And so I could relate, like, you know what I mean? So like there was some definitely like, none of them were in, you know what I mean? And like, it was a completely relatable position. It wasn't like, oh, well, you've never done this. No, actually I have, and so, and my situation is as bad, it was, as closer than you were when, and so I think that's been a blessing in disguise, because it gives me a lot of, kind of gives you the street credit, right? Like with your clients, like, hey, like you're dealing with this too. Like you're in this with us. Like it isn't just, me up here telling them what to do. And so, there's been a lot of good conversations. And so I think too, on the psychological side of things, it's a lot of times it's a lot of questions of why do you do this? What do you want to get out of it? That's different for everybody. For me this year, what I wanted to get out of prep myself was I want to look as best I ever have. None of my, like, I really didn't have any goals in terms of placing or specific shows or anything. It was more so I want to look better than ever before, make progress. And then I also, on the professional side of things, I wanted to, I'm redoing my website. I got a guy lined up, to do it, and I have a photo shoot set up to do it. And so I want some of these pictures while I'm lean on the professional side of things for an gym shoot for, my website, social media stuff, especially because I'm not going to be here for another 4 to 6 years. I want that professionally, and then on top of that, my wife was competing she's still near stage lean also. And we were going to compete together. She doesn't know if she's ever going to compete again. This is the third time she's dieted down. She's like, I don't know if I'm ever doing it again. We wanted to do some shows together before, if she decided never to do it again. This might be a now or never, you know what I mean? Like opportunity, for me. And so for both of us really. And so that's my why. But that doesn't mean that that's someone else, you know what I mean? Like someone else's why, and, it is a lot different. I think also, I think it's important. You start to see during this time who is in this because they truly enjoyed the process and who is in this because they just want to like get trophies and step on stage. And that gets, at someone's why, and I found that like I'm having some awesome workouts in my home gym. Granted, like I said, I'm fortunate to have more equipment, but like I just go in my back garage and like blast some music and get after it. And I don't know, I enjoy training, and just the process. I mean, I wouldn't have done it this long if I didn't, and it's kind of cool. I've realized it's more about, it's more than just stepping on stage and trophies for me. That's not everybody though. I mean, I've had I've had a couple of situations with clients where they thought, oh, I'm going to prolong this further. And it just wasn't happening. Like, you know what I mean? There's psychologically, it just, for whatever reason, you know what I mean? Like it just wasn't happening. And so we've kind of had to switch gears, and either, hey, let's target fall, let's gain a little weight back here, get you consistent again, maybe target fall, or let's just look at an off season. And that, again, that's different from person to person, and so I don't know that there's a right or a wrong on any of that, but those are all definitely things you need to consider.
Awesome. So this kind of brings us into the second half of this discussion with you, Peter, and that's how to maximize the off season as a natural bodybuilder. So you already touched on personally that you take some pretty long off seasons. You're already talking about a 4 to 6 year layoff after this contest season. But I think in regards to the evidence-based bodybuilding community, that's widely accepted now that if you want to maximize your genetic potential as a natural bodybuilder, you have to spend a lot of time in a caloric surplus, eating, training hard, and spending 2, 3, in your case 4 to 6 years in the off season. Also, you have published numerous peer-reviewed papers on things related to bodybuilding. So you have a paper called Nutrition Recommendations for Bodybuilders in the Off-Season, a narrative review. We kind of want to get into some concepts from this article, as well as your personal experience and your experience coaching others on how to maximize the off-season. So just to start things off, can you provide us with a little bit of general information on your off-season body weight? So is there a percentage above stage weight that you don't like to exceed? Are there certain body fat percentages you're looking at? And then how do things like your training age or your predetermined length of off season kind of factor into your recommendations?
Yeah. So there's a lot there. So I think the first thing I would say is, if you look over the course of like your training career, so like the 18 years I've been lifting, far more time's been spent out of a deficit than in one. And if you're going to maximize progress, like that's, if as a natural, like you can't be dieting all the time. And so, we talked about like my off-season lengths. When I was younger, when I first started competing, I would do 2 years and I could see visual progress in 2 years. And then, so from 2004 to 2006, 2008, it was 2. And I was seeing visual progress. I was young enough. I was, new enough to training. And then between 2008 and 2012, life kind of happened and forced a 4-year off season between moving, doing my master's, starting my PhD, getting married, all in there. And I saw a ton of visual progress. And after that, I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to compete again until I'm done with my PhD. So life kind of happened again. It was another 4 years. And then I realized like, man, I'm seeing visual progress in like 4-year chunks. And I did 4 again to 2020. And that I kind of stumbled upon like I guess I hate to say right approach, but you know what I mean? Like I stumbled upon a good approach almost by accident, and it turned out to be the approach I would recommend to people. But yes, you want a longer off season. I think you talked about off season length versus how far where to allow your weight to get to. So yeah, I guess as far as where to allow your weight to get to, we all kind of have a range of weights where we function well. So like, I would say like stage lean's down here. That's not sustainable. There's some amount above stage lean where like, if you had a good amount of restraint, like you could have hormones in a good place, metabolic rate in a good place. Your strength wouldn't be terrible. Like you'd feel normal, but like it'd take a lot of restraint to be there. So using myself as an example, last time I competed as 158, 159 carved up. This time around will probably be somewhere around there, maybe a touch heavier. But it's about that bottom number is about 170 for me, like where I could hold 170, 172, it would take a good amount of restraint. You know what I mean? A good amount of restraint, good amount of effort. That's a body weight where if I go a little over my numbers, I see larger spikes still in body weight. It's tougher to hold that, but I could and be okay. Then you kind of have that bottom number, you kind of have that range where it's like, all right, this is a range where like, I feel good. Every little thing doesn't cause my weight to spike and then stay up. Like, hunger is good. I sleep good. I'm strong. For me, that's probably like 180 to 195 ish. So what is that? 20 to 35 above stage for me. That range might be different for other people. When I start getting up to around 195 or above, that's where it starts probably being a little higher than probably needed. And so a couple signs that that's the case would be, one is I'm gaining weight, but I'm not really gaining strength as much anymore. Like I'm starting to see diminished returns, so like as you're coming up from stage lean, you're getting stronger. And at some point, like, it's like, oh man, my weight's still going up, but I'm not getting a whole lot stronger anymore. Like that's a good sign you're probably getting to the higher end of maybe where you should sit. And usually from a lot of people, especially someone like me, we talked, my metabolism is really adaptive. Hunger is not there, and there's a lot of force feeding, so that you're not getting stronger as the scale's going up, plus you're having to shovel food down when you're not hungry. And so like those are signs you're probably getting too high. And so as far as how that relates to off-season length, someone who's doing a shorter off-season, you're not going to want to drift 35 pounds over stage weight. My heaviest weight this offseason is about 197, 198, which was almost 40 over my carved up stage weight, but I had 4 years. If I only had a year and a half or 2 years between shows, I would not be 40, I'd probably 25, maybe, you know what I mean? Something like that, because the farther you get above stage weight, the sooner you have to start prep. Especially if you're going to use approaches like, and the more weight you have to lose and the longer prep you do, the more diet breaks you're probably going to want to fit in along the way and need to. And so the longer the process becomes. And so if you have, 4 years between shows, yeah, you do a 10-month prep with a bunch of diet breaks in there and not a big deal. If you have a year and a half between shows, first off, it takes 6 months roughly-ish to get hormones, metabolic rate back to normal, assuming you gain weight back after your show. And then you have another 10 months if you're doing a 10-month prep, if you're doing a year and a half between shows, there isn't really any time in there where you're gaining, because, your prime gaining time is like that, like 6 month-ish after, prep, when things normalize again, until you start cutting, or, again, like that is your time you're making progress. And so that's the time we want to try to maximize. And so, I think the longer you have, the more leeway you would have as far as upward drift. And I think I know there are other parts of that question too. Did I miss some of the other parts?
No, I think you kind of touched on everything there. There might not be a general recommendation as far as what % over stage weight you should get. You kind of, it's based on the individual, but some good ways to know whether you're too far above stage weight is depending on the length of your off season, and how is your training performance compared to this level of body fat that you're reaching.
Yeah, and I guess one other note on that, just from my experience, and this is also something that people are probably not going to like me for, but my body fat distribution is friendly. I carry a lot of fat in my low back, my back in general, and my limbs. I don't carry a lot of body fat on the front side of me, like in my abs. My highest I ever got in the off season was like 210 when I was 20 years old, which, I competed at 156 that year, and I was still nowhere near as lean as I get now. I dieted off way, I don't know how much muscle, dropping that much body fat. And so I guess what I was getting to here is, when I was younger, and the reason I got that high is because everyone kept telling me, oh, well, you still have abs, so you're fine. You're lean. You still have abs. Well, no, there's still the fat was, yeah, I had abs, but their fat was other places, right? So I still had to diet 60 pounds, almost 55 pounds, whatever it ended up being off, to get stage lean, and so, I would hesitate, to put a lot of people put their eggs in, like, can I see my abs basket? But, I think Cliff Wilson, who I co-authored my book with, and he actually, I use him as a coach, because I gets me out of my own head. I can follow direction rather than have to think about myself. But, Cliff posted a comparison picture of us a few years back when we were both coming off of preps, and he was like 15 over stage and had no abs, and I was 25 over stage, and you could see all my abs. So if you're using, like, I'm not a fan of using, like, if you're someone like him, in his case, he loses his abs at like 10, 15 over stage, you would never gain enough weight back to actually like make progress. Where in my case, you would end up like massively over stage weight, and that's not good either. And so, I would just caution, against focusing so heavily on one muscle group, or seeing one thing in terms of, am I too heavy? Am I, where do I need to be?
Awesome. So you kind of mentioned when you're pushing your body weight up and you see the scale going up, but you're not gaining much, if any, strength at that point. Does insulin sensitivity or the P ratio play any role here? Is there just a point where your body fat's so high that you just have a less opportunity, I guess, to put on muscle?
And you might, I don't know for sure. You know what I mean? I don't know if the answer to that's known. And yeah, I don't know where that number is, and how high does your body fat have to be before insulin, resistant or changes in insulin sensitivity play a role there. But I'm sure it does. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know if there's a one size fits all there, but there are definitely people though who need to have body fat higher than others to see strength gains in the gym and progress. I've worked with clients who they get 15 pounds over, male clients, they'll get like 15 pounds over stage weight, hormones, metabolic rate are good, they're setting PRs and killing it. And I've worked with other clients where they don't even feel good and really be able to train well until they're 30 pounds over stage weight, for a guy. And I think, one thing to keep in mind too is it also somewhat depends on the division you compete in, when we're talking pounds above stage weight, because even like, so in like male divisions, men's physique isn't going to be quite as lean as men's bodybuilding. Like, you're not going to have striated glutes in men's physique. You're probably going to be like 5 pounds off of that. Same with the female divisions. You look at something like bikini versus something like women's bodybuilding. A female bodybuilder might have, they a lot of times have to really grind to get, some of those really low body fat percentages, and they might have to get farther above stage weight just because stage weight is so lean. versus like someone in bikini, where it's not that bikini's not lean. It absolutely is. But there are women out there that, 10, 15 pounds over stage weight and they're fine, in bikini, and you don't see that as much like in bodybuilding. Same with like men's physique, it might be 15 pounds over stage, men's physique stage lean, but it might be 20, 25 over bodybuilding stage lean. And so I think the division you compete in, plays a role there too, but a lot of it is going to differ from person to person and depend on, how you're feeling and performing and things as well.
You mentioned when you were younger, pushing all the way up to 210 pounds. Now, this kind of gets into this topic of what I call like bodybuilding folklore. So like you hear about these massive bulks that a lot of like the best natural bodybuilders have gone on. So including yourself, I believe like Berto has a pretty like notorious story about how he was like apparently like
he was like 240.
Yeah,
that was back in the forum days, like 10, 15 years ago. Yeah.
So like, what do you think about the role of just like seeing these like all-time high body weights in the off season? Do you think that there's a potential advantage to just maximizing your muscle when you're younger and really pushing the weight? Or do you think that it's more of a product of just spending enough time in a surplus, and these people probably overdid it, but the general principles were right, where it just ended up being productive?
Yeah, so I would say, in my experience, I think 210 was too far at that age. The reason I got that high was, I did my first show in 2004. And so back in 2004, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the coaches. We had the internet. I had dial-up internet at my parents' house. But you didn't have coaches. The bodybuilding.com message boards were in their infancy. You didn't have social media or anything like that. And so I don't even know if MySpace was around at that point yet, maybe. So you worked with whoever was the local person at your gym, and some gyms had better knowledgeable people than others, and whoever competed at your gym, they just kind of latched onto them. They told you what to do and you just kind of did it, and so I did my first show. I stepped on stage at like 145 pounds and I was told, hey, you need to be bigger. And so the advice I was given to get bigger is, eat a lot of clean food, and just, get after it. And so I went from 145 to 210 in a year and a half. It wasn't, I guess I shouldn't say it wasn't pretty. You could still see outline of some of my abs though, because because of how I distribute body fat, and that got me into trouble because everyone's like, oh, you can get bigger, bigger, bigger. Right. And so I dieted down and I competed at like 156. So I did net like 10 pounds on my stage weight, but the caveat to that is I was age 18 to 20 during that time, and it was only years 2 to 4 of training age. So could I have netted that without, you know what I mean? If I'd only gotten to like 190. And so what I actually did the next off season from 2006 to 2008 is I only got up to 190, and I competed at 162, 163, basically as lean, if not leaner. And so and I don't think I gained, 7+ pounds of muscle in, those next years of 2 years of training. I think I just held on to more because I had 20 pounds less to diet when, off, and so I think there's a point of diminished returns there at some point because, flash forward to, this last off season, I got up to 197, 198. It was the heaviest I ever pushed up to since that 210. I was far stronger. I was leaner. I was far stronger, far bigger. You know what I mean? And so, but that was still the higher end of maybe where I needed to get this off season. But I do think there's benefit to pushing, but at some point you push so far that you're dieting off, like when I dieted off like 20 pounds extra weight, I dieted off a bunch of muscle because I spent, that's how much more time dieting when you have 20 pounds more to lose. And so at some point you reach a point of diminished returns, but yeah, I think a lot of people could do themselves well, letting body fat and body weight drift up, especially earlier in their training career, and staying out of a deficit and just training hard and eating a lot. But yeah, I wouldn't do what I did or do what Berto, we're talking about Berto's like 240. Like, I don't know, like there's some point where it's diminished returns where whatever you're netting in muscle gets dieted back off and then some just to get lean again.
Excellent point. So let's look into the other extreme of this conversation and the off season. So kind of this concept of gaintaining. This appears to be especially prevalent nowadays, especially when it comes to like the more advanced training and basically just, you know, constantly reiterating this need to limit body fat gain or unnecessary body fat gain in the off season, where people are gaining at very, very conservative rates. I mean, maybe a pound per month. Do you think there becomes a point where some of these guys are shooting themselves in the foot by not being a little more aggressive with their surpluses?
No, I think that like a pound per month, probably for like someone like me who's been training a long time and is natural, is probably a good suggestion. Let's back up. So coming off a show, I would be going faster than that.
Right.
There's some amount of weight you have to gain to feel normal again. And so if I remember right, so like in 2016, coming off my shows, I was upper 150s, and we said, 170s, kind of like that. Hey, I could hold this, feel good, but I'd have to be, a lot more restrictive. We hit that point probably within like 6 weeks. And then we hit that 180 probably within like 3 months, and that's kind of the bottom end of my, all right, this is sustainable off season range. Then 180 to 195 is kind of like my working off season range basically. And so the way, we treated my entire off season was, let's drift really slow from 180 up to 195. So let's gain 15 pounds in, 10, 12, 14 months. But pushing food, if I wasn't gaining, keep pushing food, like scale should be trending up. But that's 10, 12, 14 months, not dieting at a time. And let's do 15 pounds in even 10 months. It's 1.5 pounds a month. Then maybe cut for 2-3 months, get me back down to low 180s. Then let's milk that 10, 15 pounds again, and so a lot of it was, work in my functional, where I function best range of the off season weights, and stay out of a deficit and a slight surplus for as long as possible. And so, it was basically like 3 years or a little more from my last show until starting prep for this show, a little over 3 years, something like that. And I think I only did 2 to 3 month mini cuts. The rest of the time was out of a deficit. And so my ratio of time out of a deficit to in one all of a sudden becomes 5 to 1 or something like that, and that, that's where the progress adds up. And so, if someone's jumping those 10 pounds, 15 pounds, for example, they jump that in 3 months, and then they diet for 2 or 3 months, and they jump up in 2-3 months. Like that's like a 1-to-1 ratio, of time cutting to not cutting. So if you can, it's find that middle ground, because, seeing that upward drift, being in that slight surplus and doing it for a long time, where you're not rushing into cutting and that takes discipline. There are a lot of people who aren't very good at that, where their weight goes up really, or they just don't push their food enough to where they're not gaining, and so finding kind of that middle ground. But that would be the approach I would take. And I found myself and clients tend to, have the best progress is just maximize that time out of a deficit, kind of milk that range, and then cut for a couple months when you need to clean things up. And then that should clear room to allow you to drift for a while, without needing to cut again.
When you refer to kind of this like functional body weight range in the off season from 180 to 195, do you think that's clearly the superior approach as far as cycling within this range, as opposed to perhaps, settling around 190, monitoring your training performance, and then if your training performance is going up, recovery is good, and kind of like maintaining that 190, but like it improving quality? Like, is there any role to that sort of maintaining type thing, or should you always cycle that weight range?
You could do it, but I don't know that progress would happen as quickly in someone who's really experienced, because, in order to stay the same weight and get better, you would have to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, which you can do there's evidence that trained lifters can do that to maybe some extent, you know what I mean? It's not huge, if you're coming back off a layoff, drugs, coming back off an injury, a newbie, you can absolutely gain, reasonable amounts of muscle and lose reasonable amounts of fat at the same time. That gets a lot harder for someone who's advanced. Not that it can't happen, but yeah, I mean, you could do that as long as, I guess the biggest thing would be, is your training performance actually improving there? You know what I mean? Are you actually seeing progress? Because that's at the end of the day, the most important thing. And I would, I tend to think that you probably want to be in a very slight surplus rather than trying to maintain if you're trying to gain and doing, a little bit more of that cycling. But you could maintain, if you're letting your weight drift up and, you're getting kind of the higher end of your range, one time I might do that is, let's say my range roughly is 180 to 195. Maybe I get up to 196, 195, 197. I'm up at the top of that range. I need to cut, relatively soon, but like performance is still going up in the gym. Maybe I just hold off cutting and hold there until I stop kind of seeing that. And then I cut, so I kind of maximize that time at that higher weight. But I don't like having myself or someone else just sitting at a body weight maintaining, especially if like performance isn't going up. I probably want to move in one direction or another at that point.
Definitely. So you kind of alluded to this, doing mini cuts as kind of, I guess, necessary. So can you kind of dive into what the role of mini cuts are for you and how often you implement them?
Yeah. So I think, a mini cut, the role is just to get some body fat off so that you can't keep gaining forever. Like if you have a really, really long off season, where you're doing 3-4 years, you can't just keep gaining a pound a month indefinitely. You're going to, I would be more than 210. I'd be like 230 or something like that, and that's not, like we talked about, like at some point that's not doing you any good. And so it's more so just creating some room so that you can just let your weight drift up for a long time again and spend a significant amount of time out of a deficit. And so, with an off-season cut, you can be a little bit more aggressive than a prep, because your body fat's higher, and it's not going to be as long of a cut. I still wouldn't go crazy. It shouldn't be like a crash diet or anything like that, but you can push one, for most guys, 1 to 2 pounds a week or something like that, and get it done within a couple months. And really, I think the question with mini cut length is how long are you going to stay out of a deficit afterwards? And so, if you're only planning on, like if you're about to start prep in like 3 months, and you want a mini cut, I'd probably keep that mini cut pretty short because you only got like 3 months out of a deficit afterwards. And depending on where you're sitting, you may or may not even want to do that, mini cut, at that point. Where if you're like, yeah, I got like a year till I plan on dieting again. All right, well, if your mini cut takes 2 or 3 months, that's okay. You got like a year after that to not be in a deficit. But, I think the place where people get into trouble is one, they either let weight drift up way too fast that they're mini cutting all the time, or two, they're like, oh, I want to be lean for summer, or I want to be lean for this, or I want to be lean for that. That really is going to cut into your progress because you're always dieting. And when I was 197, 198, it was actually over the summer. When I hit my heaviest weights this off season, it was actually over summer of 2018 is when I really got up there. And I didn't care, like I was performing well. I was eating a lot of food. Like most of my all-time PRs were set around that time. I got a little dinged up because, a couple injury issues, and I was like, all right, let's mini cut. Let's, but I moved some weight at that point. And, so I think, just not caring, not needing to be lean for everything is probably something I would, recommend as well. Like you need to commit to the process. It doesn't mean it's a free for all. It doesn't mean you're 60 pounds over stage weight, but you're not going to be like, 10 pounds over stage weight every single summer. Like that's not going to help your progress in an extended off season.
Definitely. Really good points there, Peter. Now, do you think as far as mini cuts go, other than trying to strip off some body fat and have a quick time frame and then getting back to pushing the weight back up, do you think there are any potential benefits as far as resensitization goes? So would you be potentially more responsive to a future caloric surplus, kind of going back into it?
It's definitely possible. I mean, because losing weight, losing body fat increases insulin sensitivity. As far as hunger goes, if you're pushing up to the higher end of the range, kind of a place you can hold, and you're doing a lot of force feeding, getting that mental break for a couple months, and then, before you push again, can be beneficial just psychologically. And so, yeah, there definitely could be benefits. And just like I said, giving you, the biggest one still, I think, is just giving you room to work with without, where you can allow you be in that slight surplus and allow your weight to drift without ending up 50, 60 pounds above stage weight. But yeah, potentially, for sure.
So as kind of our last question here, I wanna pull together these concepts and throw a hypothetical scenario at you, Peter. So when we look at the rate of a surplus, we have some pretty limited data here, but most notably, I would look at Garth 2013 and then the more recent Ribeiro paper from 2019. And in both of these studies looking at a surplus, we had a more aggressive surplus compared to a much more conservative one. And at the end of these studies, they noted that there was a significant gain in body fat in the more aggressive surplus group, and a more or less non-significant difference in the accumulation of fat-free mass. So people are, they kind of take this information and they go, well, what's the point in pushing the surplus too much if you're just going to gain more body fat? It's like, well, when it comes to natural bodybuilders, we are seeing that in these more aggressive surpluses that there is more fat-free mass being accumulated with this more aggressive surplus. And, whether it's statistically non-significant, we want every ounce of muscle we can possibly have. And you kind of mentioned the use of mini cuts as more or less a last resort kind of, we want to use them sparingly. But in this theoretical scenario, do you think it could be advantageous to push these aggressive surpluses because we know that it seems like you might gain more muscle over, a certain period of time by doing so, and then using more frequent mini cuts? Do you think there could be any advantage there, or probably in the end, we're looking at more or less the same outcome?
Yeah, I would guess it might not be a huge difference, because one thing to keep in mind is what matters. We kind of talked about this some earlier too, but what matters isn't how much muscle you're holding at the start of a cut. It matters how much muscle you're holding when you get on stage. And at some point you are going to gaining fat, if you're gaining a bunch of extra body fat, how much extra lean mass are you gaining, and what are you actually netting when you come back down? Are you netting anything more? So maybe not. You know what I mean? And so you may end up in the same place. If you gain 6 pounds, say you gain 6 pounds of body weight really fast, and you gain 3 pounds lean, 3 pounds fat. When you diet, compare that to like a group that maybe gained, 3 pounds over that period and gained 2 pounds lean and 1 pound fat because they gained less body fat. They gained maybe not quite as much lean, but they gained less weight, less body fat. So you have a group that gained 6 pounds, 3 pounds lean, 3 pounds fat, and a group that gained slow, gained 2 pounds lean, 1 pound fat. That group that only gained 1 pound of fat, they probably maintain most of that 2 pounds, when they diet. That other group that gained 3 pounds of fat, are you going to hold all 3 of those pounds, or were we going to be at like 2 pounds of lean netted by the end? That's probably a more likely scenario, that they're closer together. And so I don't know where that point is. I don't think anyone knows, where that point is. And I think it depends on training age also. Someone who is newer to lifting can absolutely push food up harder than someone who's not. I have a client right now who's in high school, younger client. And he had a recent medical procedure, so he lost a little weight from that. But prior to that, he, in like 4 to 5 months, we pushed his weight up like 10 pounds, which is faster, like 4 months, like 10 pounds, and that's faster than what I would do with someone like me who's been doing it forever. But he's young, he's newer to lifting. Like this is the time where you can push, a little bit harder, a little bit faster. And so, yeah, training age will depend, you know what I mean? But, make a difference also. But yeah, I think that I don't know where that middle ground is, but yeah, I think there definitely needs to be a middle ground where you're in enough of a surplus and pushing hard enough that you're gaining lean mass, and you might gain some body fat with that, but like just trying to find that point where it's like, all right, well, I'm not gaining so much fat that I just diet off any additional lean mass that I could have gained, and so it kind of gets back to, I mean, that was a rate of loss question, but it gets back to kind of the amount or rate of gain question, but gets back to the amount of gain. Like when we're talking, when I got up to 210, and then the next off season, I only got up to 190, and I was like 7 pounds heavier on stage getting up to 190 because I dieted so much extra muscle off. Yeah, I had more muscle at 210, and I think I was probably stronger at 210 than 190, but the end result on stage looked a lot better when I only got up to 190. And that was still 30 pounds over stage weight. It wasn't like I was skimping, but it just wasn't 50, so yeah, I think that those are things to consider there as well.
Excellent. Yeah, it seems like, when it comes to a lot of these areas like training volume, our discussion, these things tend to operate on a bell curve, right?
Yeah.
Either extreme doesn't seem to be the best idea. But
for most people, yeah, and most people fall outside those extremes. I did. This is somewhat unrelated, but unrelated. I sat down. It was probably 6 months ago or more now, and I just looked at like what's the worst my clients got to, and the worst of their prep in terms of calories per pound per day. And I just went through and looked. And, because you always hear people say, oh, you need to be, you hear these generic like 10 to 12 calories per pound per day to lose, and, 14 to 16 to maintain, whatever. And so it made a bell curve. Like when I actually crafted out, like it literally made a bell curve. Like the median 50% fell between 10 to 12 calories per pound pretty much. But there were 25% that had to go lower than 10 calories per pound per day, and they're about 10% or about 25%, a quarter had to go lower than that. A quarter got away with more than 12 at the worst of prep. And so, and that doesn't mean their whole prep was there either. That was just like where they had to get to at the worst of it. But again, bell curve, right? Where like most people fall kind of not at those extremes, but there are outliers. Absolutely. I've had clients where they were down at like 8 calories per pound per day at the worst of prep. And I had a guy last year get away with like 16 or 17 because he had a fast metabolism and a really active job. So he got away with like 16 or 17. But again, like you said, a lot of these things like training volume, same thing, bell curve. Doing one set to failure probably for most people isn't the best idea, and doing 3-hour marathon workouts 6 days a week probably isn't the best idea for most people, and most fall somewhere in the middle. But there are those outliers that might be out there. But yeah, it's same type of distribution for sure.
Super valuable insight there, Peter. Yeah, just kind of like we touched on earlier, so perhaps for someone, they might feel strong as an ox, recovery's in a good place, being 35 pounds above stage weight, whereas someone else, they might feel that way at 20. And if they push it to 25, 30, they're like, I'm not seeing any increases here. All I'm doing is accumulating body fat.
Yeah, and a lot of time, and they might even be someone too, where it's like, man, I feel like I'm forcing food down, and yeah, absolutely. And they're not getting stronger. And yeah, there can absolutely be those differences.
Well, I think that's all Mike and I have for you today, Peter. We really appreciate you coming on, sharing your experiences, your insights, and your expertise with us and our listeners. Really appreciate it. And for anyone that is not following or supporting you, where can they best find you?
Yeah. So best places to find me, probably my Instagram's at FitBodyPhysique. My website is fitbodyphysique.com. My email is fitbodyphysique@gmail.com. So they're all the same, which keeps it easy. And then they can also find my book on Amazon. So Bodybuilding, the Complete Contest Preparation Handbook. I got plug of the book. But yeah, you can find that on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold. I think it's like $20 on Amazon. So it's not going to make or break your bank account.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, everyone check Peter out if you're not already following him already. And if you're if you're watching on YouTube, you can also check out the podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts as well. For now, we bid you adieu. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And Peter, once again, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Peter.
Take care, everyone.